Welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining us today at this launch of the Mindfulness Initiative's latest publication, Implementing Mindfulness in Schools: An Evidence-Based Guide. I'm Jamie Bristow. I'm director of the Mindfulness Initiative. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our organization before introducing our esteemed speakers today, the co-leads for education policy on our team, and they will introduce this document to you all. Um, so uh, the Mindfulness Initiative is an education charity. It's a policy institute or a think tank, as it's sometimes called, which came out of a teaching program for politicians in the British Parliament. So in 2013, MPs and members of the House of Lords started to practice together, guided by the University of Oxford Mindfulness Centre. And after a year or so of personal practice, they became interested in the science behind what they'd been experiencing, and became interested in the policy implications. And Katherine and myself are two of the kind of experts and volunteers who came together to support those politicians to create an all-party parliamentary group on mindfulness. And we helped them to conduct an inquiry, having a number of hearings, looking at the application of mindfulness in different areas of public life. And since then, over the last 7 years, there's developed a kind of a community of practitioners in Westminster, and we've continued to inquire into new areas in health and education, etc., but also in the domain of social change, or new areas like mindfulness in policing, or mindfulness aging well in older people. So over the years, we have developed from primarily just supporting the all-party parliamentary group on mindfulness to having a number of other roles, developing sort of thinking and thought leadership, developing guidance for the mindfulness sector, as well as education sector, which we're about to hear about today. And over the years, we have created a range of free resources and other materials that you can find on our website. So in 2015, we launched the first policy report about mindfulness, followed that up with a publication looking at sort of a toolkit for implementation in the workplace. And then more recently, launching a field book for mindfulness innovators, policy briefings on health, well-being, and some specific applications therein. And this last year, we published a document offering a framework for understanding how mindfulness might underpin intentional action in responding to the crises of our time. So yes, if you go to themindfulnessinitiative.org, navigate to our work and then publications, you'll find the document that we're about to speak about today, as well as a whole range of free goodies that we've produced for you over the last 7 years. Oh yes, and we also convene a network of champions of mindfulness in the workplace called the Mindful Workplace Community. And so if you'd like to hear more about that, then you can navigate to mindfulworkplace.community. Okay, so that's the the organizational context completed. It's now my great pleasure to hand over to introduce and then hand over to my colleagues, who for the last 2 years have been the education policy co-leads for the Mindfulness Initiative. As you'll hear, they've been conducting consultation and research amongst educators, experts in the field, identified a particular priority for us as the Mindfulness Initiative and how we can help the development of mindfulness in education, and have been working slavishly over the last year or year to deliver on that. So first up, we have Katherine, Professor Katherine Weare, Emeritus Professor at the University of Southampton. Katherine started out as a school teacher and is now known internationally for her groundbreaking work on mindfulness in education. This grows out of a long career focusing on research and development on well-being, mental health, and social and emotional learning in education. Katherine has published some of the most influential books on the subject, and has advised UK governments, the European Union, and the World Health Organization, and led on the development of practical strategies and programs across most European countries, which have sustained to this day. These include the Social Emotional Aspects of Learning, or SEAL program, across the UK, and the European Network of Healthy Schools across Europe, both of which put well-being at the heart of a whole school process. Her recent book, co-written with the Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, Happy Teachers Change the World, A Guide to Cultivating Mindfulness in Education, has been translated into 7 languages and has won several awards. She's, as well as being our policy lead, she's also leading the development of the vibrant Community of Contemplative Education for Mind and Life Europe. We are very grateful that Katherine is a member of our team. And I'd just like to add that she's really gone above and beyond on this particular project and put a great deal of herself into it over this last year. Her colleague, Adrian Bethune, is a part-time school teacher and wellbeing lead governor at a primary school in Buckinghamshire in the United Kingdom, and founder of Teachappy. In 2012, he was awarded a Happy Hero Medal by Lord Richard Layard in the House of Lords. And in 2015, was invited to contribute to an event with the Dalai Lama called Creating a Happier World. Adrian is also an author of the award-winning Wellbeing in the Primary Classroom, A Practical Guide to Teaching Happiness, and co-author of A Little Guide to Teacher Wellbeing and Self-Care, out last year. He writes regularly for the Times Education Supplement and has contributed to a number of other books. He is also a lead author and designer of the Oxford University Press International Curriculum for Wellbeing. So I hope you'll agree to, we'd struggle to find 2 more qualified and complementary people to be leading our work, and I think this really is evident in the material that they've published. So without further ado, I'll come back on in about half an hour or so to manage some questions for you from you. Please put your questions in the Q&A function, which you should find on the bar at the bottom of your Zoom screen, rather than in the chat, because we might lose them there. Feel free to say where you're calling in from, or speak to each other in the chat, but I'm afraid the speakers won't be able to keep track of it. So yeah, I'll come back in to manage that process in half an hour. But now over to you, Katherine and Adrian.
Right, great. Thank you, Jamie. And it's a real delight to be here today. And it's been a real delight working on this, particularly with Adrian. We call ourselves Kadrian for for teamwork purposes, and we've worked very closely together on this. So it's a real joy. And as I think you can see, our skills and backgrounds are very complementary. Okay, well, we're going to share with you today something about this new guidance, Implementing Mindfulness in Schools, an evidence-based guide. You'll be relieved to know we're not going to drag you through it forensically, because we assume you can download it and read the content. But we would like to share with an audience we know are probably pretty expert in this field why we made the choices we made. We thought that might be useful for you to perhaps inform your own thinking. Why did we do what we did? And connected with that, to outline some of the key and sometimes new emphases that we made within the field. But the second half of this is really important to us. We really would like your feedback. It's very much a document in progress. So please give us feedback today, and of course, send in to the Mindfulness Initiative any thoughts you have for things we've missed or comments. We really would value that. Now, as Jamie, I think, has mentioned, the Mindful Nation report back in 2015 was a really landmark report from the Mindfulness Initiative, which set the direction of mindfulness in the UK really in quite a profound way. And I was very honoured to be part of the group that presented evidence on education and testimony around education and mindfulness. And to cut a long story short, we came to, I think, 4 very crucial conclusions which have underpinned the work ever since. We concluded that there is promising evidence for the outcomes of mindfulness in education, particularly around psychosocial issues and well-being. That this work is best done within a whole school approach, and we were very aware that that was work in progress. It was at the time a bit rare. It's fortunately becoming more prevalent now, and we found that in our efforts to uncover information for this guidance. We were also very aware that outcomes are all very well, but you need to know what kind of implementation leads to those outcomes, because things work differently in different places. So there was a new emphasis on implementation. And a really vital cornerstone was the importance of the teacher's own practice, the belief that you can't help other people to become mindful if you're not yourself mindful, and how vital it is that teachers embody mindfulness and are fully present in their teaching. So those were the kind of 4 cornerstones, and they've actually remained very strongly behind what we've done since. Okay, Adrian, over to you now.
Thank you. So in terms of what's in the guidance, there are 3 main sections. So there's understanding mindfulness, there's does mindfulness work, and if so, how? And then finally, there's implementing mindfulness in schools. And, you know, over the next kind of half hour or so, we'll take you through some of the key points from those sections. But first of all, we thought it might be really useful to set the background and to kind of share why this new document has come about in the first place, you know, why it came into being. And so, as Jamie said, Katherine and I were appointed as co-leads back in spring 2019. And essentially, one of the first things we had to do was consult with the field of mindfulness and education to get a deeper understanding of what was happening. So as part of that, we consulted with about 30 practitioners and experts, and these were made up of some of the program leads from the main programs that were being used, mindfulness programs being used in schools. We spoke to school leaders, so a range of head teachers, you know, deputy CEOs of multi-academy trusts, policy leads at organisations like the National Association of Head Teachers, people like Liz Williams, chair of mindfulness in Wales, various researchers and academics from a range of universities in the UK, and then some thought leaders, people like Professor Guy Claxton and Lord Richard Layard. And we were asking them, you know, how does mindfulness relate to education? What's currently happening in the field? What's helping move things along? What are the barriers? What are the obstacles? What are some of the hot topics and issues right now? And also we asked them for suggested action. So how can Katherine and I help move the field of mindfulness and education forward? And I'd just like to share some of the, and this document, this fed into a strategy for mindfulness and education document, which Jamie said is that this is on the Mindfulness Initiative website, which you can download as well. But some of the key recommendations and actions that the consultation kind of put forward was to give advice on how best to develop authentic and sustainable mindfulness within education, to collate and share the latest research, to provide advice and guidance on how to measure the impact of mindfulness in education, and then finally to create resources to help champions build the case for mindfulness and to communicate this to stakeholders. So this very much fed into this latest document that we've created. And then off the back of that initial consultation, we created a steering group. So made up mainly of people that we consulted with, but then we realized there were some kind of gaps in our knowledge. So we reached out further. So we included people from the Myriad project, the My Resilience in Adolescence mindfulness research projects taking place as part of the Oxford Mindfulness Centre. And also, you know, because we knew this new guidance had to share the latest research, which includes, you know, neuroscientific research, we made sure that we had, you know, expertise, professors of neuroscience on our steering committee. And essentially, when we met with the steering group, they said that our guidance needs to be, the following things. It needs to be trustworthy. So we need to be fair and balanced with the evidence that we're kind of citing and what mindfulness can and can't do. They believed it needed to be authoritative. So very much like that landmark document, the Mindful Nation UK report from 2015, many people in the consultation and steering group said it would be great if there was a document similar to that for mindfulness and education. That it has to share the latest research and evidence, has to be user-friendly. So if this is to appeal and to be used by teachers, school leaders, who are naturally busy people, it has to be useful for them. But equally, it has to have a wide appeal. So as well as appealing to teachers and school leaders, it needs to appeal to policymakers, it needs to appeal to people that are brand new to mindfulness, as well as those that are far more experienced. And so all of this fed into our implementation guidance. And something that definitely came out of the consultation and also discussions with the steering group was how important it was to kind of address exactly what mindfulness is. What is authentic mindfulness? And we know that many people that will read our guidance and also that maybe are attending this webinar are very well versed in what mindfulness is. But the consultation highlighted that there was often a lot of confusion and maybe misconceptions about what mindfulness is. So our very first chapter is about understanding mindfulness and explaining what mindfulness is. And we use a kind of key definition that comes from Jon Kabat-Zinn that says mindfulness is about paying attention to present moment experience inside ourselves, our minds, our bodies, and in our environment with certain attitudes of mind, such as openness, curiosity, kindness, and care. We also emphasize in this first chapter that mindfulness is about relating to our experience in a different way, maybe a way that we're not used to experiencing or relating to. So such as kind of turning towards difficulty, about leaning into discomfort. So rather than wishing things were different, that actually accepting them and being with them exactly as they are. That mindfulness is a natural human capacity. I remember reading an article where Jon Kabat-Zinn was interviewed, and he said that, saying that mindfulness comes from ancient wisdom traditions is similar to maybe saying that gravity comes from England because Isaac Newton discovered it. We are all mindful to a greater or lesser extent, and that mindfulness as a formal practice is a way of cultivating that natural innate human capacity. And finally, that mindfulness can be seen as an antidote to mind wandering or living on autopilot, that sense where our bodies are doing one thing, but our minds are somewhere else. And there was that landmark study from 2010 with two researchers from Harvard University that found that on average, people spend about 50% of their lives in a state of mind wandering. And that when they're in this state of mind wandering, they tend to be less satisfied with their lives. And they concluded in this study that a human mind is a wandering mind and a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. And so mindfulness training can be a way of kind of, training our minds to notice where our attention is and noticing if our minds have wandered and to intentionally bring it back to focus on the here and now. And we also make sure that we address some of these common myths and misconceptions in this opening chapter. And so we talk about what mindfulness isn't. So we share that, mindfulness isn't, it's not goal orientated. We're not trying to be calm and relaxed. And this is often a misconception that we've come across that is promoted, that mindfulness is a way of cultivating calm and relaxation. And yes, they tend to be pleasant side effects of practicing mindfulness, particularly over a period of time. But we believe it's really important to communicate, especially to children and teachers and those new to mindfulness, that the goal is not to be calm and relaxed. Because if you believe that is the goal and you practice mindfulness and you don't feel calm and relaxed, you can come to the conclusion that you're failing at mindfulness or that mindfulness isn't for you, and it can turn you off practicing mindfulness. So we believe it's really important to say that it's about tuning into and accepting things as they are, and that yes, maybe over time you might feel more calm and relaxed, but that isn't the goal. That mindfulness isn't about stopping thoughts or emptying your mind. It's cultivating a new relationship with your thoughts. It's about stepping back. It's about noticing thoughts and choosing to let them go. That mindfulness is not a behavior management technique. It's not a way to quieten unruly children or to get people to be more compliant. And finally, that mindfulness is not a silver bullet that's going to solve all of society's ills, or all of the the challenges that we face in education. It's not going to solve the mental health crisis. It's not going to solve the obesity crisis and all the other crises that we may face. But we do believe, and we put this case forward in the document, that it can be part of the solution. So I'm going to hand back over to Katherine now, who's going to talk more about the other sections. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. Right, just give me a minute, guys. Technology is not my best thing. Here we go. Right. Thank you, Adrian. Now, building on a lot of what Adrian has said, I'll just take you through some of the further work we did and explain why we did it, really. We were hearing that although you might think that work on the outcomes of mindfulness for children and young people is well known, that actually it's not as well known as it might be, and that people need summaries in this field. And so we made sure that there was a clear summary of all of the work around teachers and children, and followed by chapters in detail on some of the outcomes. So just looking at we went through the fairly well-trodden work on mental health and stress and so on, but we also focused on newer work on well-being and happiness, and connected it very much with work on social and emotional learning and social and emotional skills. This slide perhaps demonstrates empathy, but as you will know, social and emotional skills is a very large field around self-awareness, resilience, optimism, relationship building, and this field itself is a really important one. But it's not only about that, and we also wanted to connect it with outcomes around things that are dear to the heart of any school, really. Performance, and also young people, like being effective at what they do. And I think newer work, which is very helpful, connecting this with work around cognition, academic learning, doing well in tests and SATs and so on. We were very much of the belief that these things are not antithetical. It's not, is it about attainment or is it about well-being? That mindfulness can contribute right across the spectrum. Now, I'm just going to go out of this a moment because I've managed to mess up on my slide order. Never mind, it's fine. I'll just go back to the mindful outcomes for teachers. In fact, we start with this in the book because we are very keen to emphasise that we start with teachers. And it's a similar story, I think, that well-known evidence around mental health and well-being and stress reduction. I think many of us feel unravelling at the moment in some way. But again, linking up with aspects of well-being, of being authentic, of feeling present for one's students, of having a sense of meaning in one's life. So this broader agenda. And really new interesting work coming out on teacher effectiveness at some of the tougher sides of education. The juggling of the snowstorm that happens in the classroom when all the inputs are coming at you at once, the priority setting, the time management. Teachers who practice mindfulness are just better at some of these tough skills as well as the softer skills. And we try and summarize that because we feel that's a very important selling point for this in schools. Now, I've done the young people slide in the wrong order, never mind. We also wanted to get behind the usual work on outcomes and building on Jamie's and Rosie's very excellent agency document to look at how mindfulness works and look at the mechanisms and the neuroscience that underlie the outcomes. And this again will be familiar to many of you, of course, but one of the key mechanisms is the honing of the attention. And I think we know that where we put our attention is what shapes our lives. And we know how much the attention is being hijacked, as in this case, this person with whom I identify greatly, finding it difficult to concentrate with all blaring information coming from the world. And of course, this particularly affects the young who are really struggling with the ability to pay attention. And if we can help people to hone their attention, we really help them get a grip on their life as well as their education. Work around what's variously called metacognition, or cognitive reframing, or decentering, standing back from the thought stream, from the emotion stream, and be able to assess the value of what we're thinking about and to get a handle on that. This is absolutely crucial to the quality of our lives, the emotional life that we lead, so we can distinguish between our gloomy and unrealistic thoughts, but also, of course, links straight into the core work of schools around cognition, around executive function, around critical thinking, assessing evidence. So this mechanism that mindfulness develops is a really vital one for education. Compassion, and wonderful work developing on the relationship between mindfulness and compassion, a vital human capacity to show compassion to oneself, which most of us lack. Young people are really suffering in our very comparative world. And we know the mental health problems are going through the roof. Well, often this is what's behind that. And of course, helping with social polarization and lack of understanding for other people. All leading really to the overall skill of self-regulation, which includes emotional regulation, in which we basically bring all of this together. The ability to manage our thoughts, our feelings, our lives, to set priorities, to make choices, to make decisions. This is kind of, in a sense, who we are. And what we were intrigued about with the neuroscience, we've tried very much to link the parts of the brain with the mechanisms we're talking about, and that was quite possible, and we had a lot of help from some splendid neuroscientists. But it's also been really clearly pointed out to us how interlinked all these are, how you can't really separate out mind and body, obviously, but you can't necessarily separate out the bits of the brain and say this bit does that, that bit does that. But what we're learning is how interlinked all of these systems are. And that was really, I think, important. And we put this in because it fascinates teachers very often and also fascinates children and young people. And we have some lovely case studies, I think, in the document about teachers using this in their classrooms, this kind of work. And what it adds up to really is, I think, a new agenda for mindfulness in education, where it's seen as foundational and transformative. It's not a bolt-on extra. It's not something that you can put up and take down. It starts to become woven into the very fabric of what we're trying to do in education, in our own thriving, in our own sense of having meaning and purpose in our lives. So we're moving mindfulness really to the heart of the human endeavour here. And of course, we're very aware in all of this that we're hardly inventing this. We're drawing on a very deep tradition, which combines education, ethics and contemplation. I love this quote from Aristotle. I often ask people who they think said it, and they'll say Rousseau or Dalai Lama. It is the Dalai Lama, but it's also Aristotle who pointed out that you can't educate the mind without educating the heart, otherwise it's a hollow. Thich Nhat Hanh and his splendid quotation to remind us that we're not just transmitting knowledge, but we're constructing a worthy human race to take care of our planet. John Kabat-Zinn, who's extended his original definition that Adrian talked about with a lovely little coda. Then I sometimes add to the usual stuff about paying attention on purpose, blah, the service of self-understanding and wisdom. And I think that's really wonderful to remind us of the purpose of this, and links directly with some of the purposes of education. Now, moving on, we tried to be very practical as well and talk about implementing mindfulness in schools. And we found that in many places, people rush too quickly to deciding on a program and thinking that's the silver bullet, as Adrian put it. So we've reviewed what the key foundations are. And one is to have champions in schools who really spread clearly this sense of what mindfulness is and isn't, particularly to the senior management group, because the evidence shows that unless senior managers, the head teachers and others really ideally practice mindfulness, not just cheer from the sidelines, that mindfulness in schools tends to come and go. It needs to be there, resourced on the timetable as a real good starting point for this work. And schools do well to evaluate what they're doing. We actually have a whole chapter on evaluation, and one of its proposals is that people collect data right at the outset. And a reminder, of course, that this is a long-term project, that it takes time. Developing mindfulness for teachers, as you've gathered, we're very keen on, that this is where it starts, and we're very conscious of how busy our teachers are. And I'm sure we've all felt like this from time to time in our practice. But that unless we encourage teachers to start with themselves, they won't have the ability to help other people. And that they need, again, very much to be clear what mindfulness is, and not to see it as a panacea or to sell it as a panacea, but to have a realistic notion of what it can and can't help with. We're also conscious that sometimes mindfulness will be put into a school but not resourced after that, and how important it is to have, for example, lunchtime practice groups to integrate mindfulness in the normal business of a school day, and to find the resources to continue to support teachers, sending them on further training, on retreats and so on. And of course, then the one where many people start, but we deliberately didn't start with this. This is chapter 8, which is teaching mindfulness to students. Now, I guess that's the familiar image of polite kids politely meditating at their desks. And of course, that is there. But we also have made it clear that that may not be for everyone. But that what you do need to do is to make sure that the work you're doing is based on authentic, grounded relationships with young people. And that the tone you're using is an invitational one, where some young people may not feel comfortable meditating, particularly, as we know, those with trauma. And we're very keen and spend a lot of time in the document on the need to be trauma informed in the work that we do in schools, and to allow young people to sit out of meditation if they find it alarming, but nevertheless to participate in the development of the attitudes of kindness and open-mindedness that mindfulness is about. We're keen too that teachers and others use all the skills at their disposal to make this work fun, engaging, relevant, diverse. And we've got a lovely case study in there of teaching mindfulness through hip hop. Peer learning, where young people teach one another, is extremely engaging. And skillful inquiry. It was brought to our attention how tricky this can be for some teachers who tend to live in the world of fix-it and solutions and generalising. That's our training. This was definitely my training. I had to sit hard on my Mrs. Fix-It, and to help keep the inquiry after a practice grounded in the here and now experience of the young people, asking them what happened exactly, and encouraging them to be forensic, encouraging them to be with the difficult as well as the easy. Now, there's much talk about the need to embed within a whole school approach, and this theory of the whole school approach is one very dear to my heart, having worked on this for a long time. So I'd like to share with you what we found when we looked in schools. And we found that what's happening very much does mesh with the evidence base of what the whole school approach is about. And this belief and understanding that you have to build from the foundations upwards of staff capacity. And we have many examples there of how important teachers said that is. As one said, they know if you don't practice, was one of her comments on the young people. Plenty of examples and evidence for how we can begin with the low-lying fruit of mental health and well-being and work on social and emotional skills. And mindfulness is often based in that area. Special needs work, particularly tailoring this work to the needs of children who are more vulnerable and have more difficulties. Student engagement, I've already mentioned through peer learning, but just making sure that the young people themselves identify with this work. And of course, reaching out to parents. Some schools have parental work as well as with the young people. Parent mindfulness is increasingly on the increase. And a really important one, I think, how to link this work with mainstream curriculum, with teaching and learning, to start to embed it in the things that many schools still see as absolutely their core business, and work around metacognition and critical thinking, as I've indicated. And that is starting. We had a lovely example of a school that began by looking at mental health and well-being, and then realised it had moved right into the heart of their teaching and learning agenda. And then finally, and this is really very important, into the climate and ethos of their classrooms, of their schools in which people are valued and cared for, and where there is respect and time for people. Now that I think is probably more important than any of the detail. And all of this adds up to a whole school approach where things are cohesive, where there's teamwork. Now, we wouldn't claim for a moment that all schools in the UK are working on mindfulness in this way, but we heard enough examples, and we have enough examples to see this as quite a strong steer towards the way forward, I think. And now I think I'm adding back to Adrian, so I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Katherine. So our document shares the work of several mindfulness-based programs in schools. And this is not an exhaustive list. There are more programs that exist. There's apps, there's books. But the reason these are included was they were typically well-established programs in UK schools, and or they had been independently evaluated, or they were in the process of being evaluated. And that was important, that we could signpost people that read our document to the evidence base that is linked to some of these programs. The Mindfulness Initiative doesn't promote any one program, and indeed our guidance document doesn't say that there is any one way of doing things in schools, but we can be led by the evidence base, what seems to work or what can work in different contexts. And what we do share is a table of programs at the end of the document, and it gives guidance on what the program, the details, where you can find out more about particular programs. The programs that are on offer, the cost, and links to any kind of published evaluations of these programs. And then what we kind of advise in our guidance is that schools choose really carefully a program that is right for their context, because all of these different programs approach mindfulness in slightly different ways. And so it's important that schools find the right fit for them. And also we kind of explore, and I saw a question in the Q&A which kind of links to this slide. Schools might want to decide on whether they bring in an external teacher who's well trained in mindfulness to deliver a program, or whether they want to kind of train up staff internally and do it that way. And there are pros and cons to kind of both approaches, and we explore that in our guidance as well. But one thing Katherine and I were really keen on was that our document was littered with real-world case studies from actual schools in the UK. And we made sure that there's a range of case studies from primary and secondary schools, from the state and independent sector, that there are examples from multi-academy trusts and also local authority schools. Two of the maps included examples from Reach Academy, or Reach 2 Academy, which is the largest primary only academy chain in the UK, and also Star Academy, which has schools in the Midlands and Northwest of England, with a really diverse range of primary and secondary schools. Also, we've got examples from pupil referral units, such as the Decorum Education Support Centre. There's a great case study on them in the document. And there's also examples from special educational needs schools as well. We were also keen to have examples of schools at various stages of implementation. So schools right at the beginning of their journey, some in the middle, and some several years along with embedding mindfulness in the whole school context. And this was important so that whoever reads this document, hopefully there will be schools that you can relate to, that there are case studies that you can kind of learn from. And I'm sure we've included the names of the schools and academy trusts. If you're working at a PRU and you're interested in embedding mindfulness and you reached out to other PRUs in our document, I'm sure they would be happy to kind of talk further about their journey with mindfulness. But this is what these case studies do. They bring to life the reality of what it's like to practice and embed mindfulness in a typical school setting. The things that work, the things that go well, but also some of the many challenges. And that we have a range of examples across the UK, Scotland, England, Wales. We spoke to teachers in Northern Ireland, but what we found hard was to find schools that had embedded mindfulness there. So as Katherine said earlier, this is a work in progress document. If you work at a school in Northern Ireland, if you know some great work that's happening in Northern Ireland, please get in touch, because we'd love to learn more about that. And also we have pupil voice. We have, quotes from children and young people throughout our document, their experience of learning mindfulness, what it means to them. And it's really important that we don't forget the importance of listening to children, asking children and young people how they experience mindfulness. Does it work for them? What works well, what jars with them? Because it's really important, because that helps you tailor any program or any approach so that it is valuable and relevant to children and young people in schools. So I'm now going to hand back to Katherine, who's going to talk about kind of next steps and future directions of mindfulness in education. I've got to give the cliche, Katherine, you're on mute.
Yes, I know.
There we go.
Can you hear me now? Now I want it to move. Breathe among yourselves, people. Have we done that one? Excuse me, people. Right, here we are. Right. I'm sharing my common humanity here, so that's all right. I'll be very brief now because time's getting on, just to indicate what we feel are some of the next steps and future directions. And many of them we've touched on already, but this need to embed more in educational approaches and thinking. We're very respectful of the background of this work from mindfulness-based initiatives, from medical context, from health context, but really feeling we need to move on now to really develop this in educational ways with plenty of innovation. But we're also keen that new innovations do, again, respect the evidence base and try to collect outcome data on whether what they're doing is more effective. So we're concerned about some places where it may be a kind of tick box, we do mindfulness in our school, but in a rather light way. So we'd like to know what's a good enough outcomes to really have the effects we want. We are keen to develop this in initial teacher education and very pleased to see some examples of that, but very much for the student teachers themselves, not as a quick background to go and teach this to students. It's about their own well-being. And there's a great need, I think, for greater diversity in what we're doing. We're building on the excellent work we've already there, but more work around what's needed for different age groups, cultures, racial groups, and of course vulnerabilities, looking at, as I say, the need of young people with trauma and difficulties, and of course teachers with trauma and difficulties too. And we feel it's a real opportunity right now for mindfulness, as Winston Churchill said. We've got plenty of crises on the go, and we can make, I think, some value from them as well as responding to them. We're seeing many areas where there's an urgent re-examining of education, some major initiatives from the World Economic Forum with its Great Reset, the Futures of Education initiative by UNESCO. The world is ready, I think, for reimagining what the purpose of education is to meet the crises that are hitting us in the face. And we have that opportunity, I think, right now. But this is quite urgent because we don't want to go the way of our illustrious predecessors here. We need to be demonstrating how mindfulness can help us to cultivate what Zach Stein calls a new kind of human to face these challenges, and before it's too late. Because as the last lot said, the picture's bleak, the world's climates are changing, the mammals are taking over, and we all have brains the size of a walnut. Now we really need to work on our own walnut brains here, and this, I think, is where mindfulness can be so helpful in helping to develop those inner capacities to meet the outer challenges that face us all. So thank you very much for listening, and we would love questions, comments and advice. I'll stop sharing and Jamie can take the reins again.
Great. Thank you very much, Katherine and Adrian. So I just want to add that I think this is a really deep resource that we hope will be contributing value to the field for many years to come. But it isn't necessarily designed to be read from front to back, and actually, depending on where you are in your sort of journey with it in your education context, you might want to dip into particular sections. But it is really easy to navigate. They've done a great job of doing that. In fact, one of the early reviewers called it a page turner as well. So despite it sort of not being read from front to back, you might find yourself doing so. So yeah, now we're going to move to questions. As Pilar has said in the chat, please do put your questions in the Q&A function and click the thumbs up button if there's anything you particularly like to hear answered. We're going to go over to Claire Farrell now, and whilst we fiddle with the technicals, perhaps check in with your breath and give yourself a bit of a pause in proceedings. But yeah, over to you, Pilar, please, to magically.
So I think Claire is unmuted now, so she's welcome to ask her question.
Okay, thanks everybody. And firstly, I just want to say thank you for such a wonderful publication. And Jamie, I can also say that I found it a page turner and read it from cover to cover. I think it's a tremendous resource for all educators. So thank you very much for all of your hard work, for the whole panel on it. It's a superb publication. My question to you guys is, we know the importance of teacher training in mindfulness, And do you ever see it becoming part of initial teacher training for all? So as part of the profession, there is that opportunity to learn how to practice mindfulness.
Adrian, do you want to answer that? Because that was something you were particularly interested in, wasn't it?
Yeah. You know what's interesting? So one of the people we spoke to in our consultation is Professor Richard Layard, and his latest book, Can We Be Happier? In the section on education, talks about, you know, I think he explicitly says all teachers should go on a mindfulness course because it can be so transformative. And I'm not sure Katherine and I would agree with that. I certainly believe that it should be offered. The opportunity should be there for training teachers to experience what mindfulness is, because it's not for everyone. But if access was more readily available, I do really think it would benefit trainee teachers, because we know from research gathered by things like the Teacher Wellbeing Index, annual report into teacher education professionals' wellbeing, gathered by Education Support charity in the UK. We know that teachers under incredible stress suffer from higher levels of anxiety and depression than the national average, and mindfulness does have a very good evidence base for adults and helping, you know, adults cope with mental health challenges such as that. So yeah, I personally think there should be, as a part of initial teacher education, a whole unit, a whole module mandatory on mental health and well-being, both for you as an individual, a teacher, but also young people as well. And as part of that, I think teachers should be introduced to
Yes, I'd agree with that. I think everyone could have a taster, but you do have to be careful and make sure it's invitational. But I think the core attitudes of mindfulness, of kindness and open-mindedness, need to run through everything we do in teacher education. And I think it would be great when that happens. Of course, you need the lecturers who are teaching the students to embody it themselves first. You don't want this shoved on people. So we need to think about that too. Okay.
Great. So,
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. And we're going to go over to Deborah now, I think. Pilar, is that right?
Yes. So I don't know if, Deborah, would you be willing to ask your question live, or would you rather we read it out loud? You can type into the chat.
Whilst we're waiting for that, Katherine, actually, we seem to have lost Adrian.
Yeah, we've lost Adrian.
Oh dear. But Katherine, perhaps have a scan through the
Yes, I will,
questions if you can, because
Maybe
there's so many great questions in there, and it's going to be even with the upvoting function, it's going to be difficult.
Deborah is ready to ask her question.
Great.
Thank you so much. So I'm just wondering how you know whether the climate or ethos of a school is ready to implement mindfulness, and also what your thoughts are as to whether this should be more of a bottom-up or a top-down, or something in between, in terms of deciding when a school should begin a program.
Okay. Right. Well, we've got an exact answer to that question from somebody very experienced, Amanda Bailey, in our guidance, who says that you need both top down and bottom up. You can't impose it from above. You know, some keen head teacher shoving this up the noses of everyone on the staff will be terrible. But it's also very difficult for young, newly qualified teachers to affect the school themselves. They may, of course, we can all work on this in our relationship with young people in our own classrooms. You know, this is I don't necessarily mean teaching children to meditate, but we can bring presence and open-mindedness and kindness. So it depends on what level you're talking. But you do need ideally both. And the question of how you know, we're of course not the mindfulness police, so we're not going around assessing whether people are ready yet. And I think schools themselves will know that. But we do encourage people to take it slowly and to take time to really get what mindfulness is. And I think once schools do that, then they let it grow at the right kind of pace. It's shoving it through in a mandatory way that can put people off. And we know that from some of the evidence. There are examples of teens who are finding this is being taught by people who don't really understand what it is, and it's all very normative and doesn't start where they are at all, and who are worryingly being put off what might be a life-saving skill for them in later life by it being badly taught. So we need to take it slowly. And I think trust the teachers, trust the young people. If we can get authentic mindfulness into schools, I think it does a lot of its own work on that. So, any other question, anyone? I don't think we've got time to get back to people, but if anything we say doesn't resonate, please do email in, won't you? We'd be very happy to engage in further conversation with you.
Yes, thank you so much, Deborah. I think that, I mean, there's such rich questions here. I think we'll take them away. If they aren't, if they aren't covered in the document, we'll certainly look at responding to them in some way, or maybe sort of just giving page references that kind of send you to an answer. We have a question from Guy. Katherine, what do skeptics or cynics say about mindfulness in education, and what are the most effective ways of responding? Katherine and Adrian, sorry, I didn't mean to direct that.
Is Adrian back?
I'm back.
Adrian's with us, yeah.
Shall I?
Well, you kick off, Adrian, because you did the myths, didn't you?
I would say the argument that comes up most from kind of cynics and skeptics is that mindfulness is a fad, that it's the the latest craze in education, because education, especially in England, has suffered a lot of new big things that come along. There's a lot of energy behind them, and then they just kind of fizzle out, and then there's the next new big thing. Another example could be growth mindset, where there is actually a mix but good evidence base, but there is a lot of hype around it, and I think essentially things get oversold, and it can be the case with mindfulness as well. People oversell the benefits, doesn't live up to expectations, and it just fizzles out. So in terms of how you approach the cynics and the skeptics, I would say give a very balanced and measured account of the evidence base. What does it show? What are the limits? In what context does it work? When doesn't it work? And also, get people to experience it. So it does help sometimes to have an external or a well-versed trainer in mindfulness to come and give a kind of taster, which is optional. It shouldn't be, like Katherine said, this mandatory, right, we're all going to meditate after school today. Previous school I worked in, we offered taster sessions. We found an external teacher locally who came in, and if staff wanted to sign up, they could. And that was a really great way of, offering it out there to people. But I find that sharing the evidence base, sharing the research, and letting people know that there is even a mindfulness research centre at Oxford University, Bangor University, Exeter, Cambridge. I think some people think that this is this new age hippie thing, but actually it's being studied empirically by neuroscientists and psychologists, and I think that can win quite a few people over as well. What do you think, Katherine? Anything
Yes,
to add?
the only thing I'd add, and I won't go into detail, but is the familiar accusation that it's a sort of tool of corporate capitalism, and it's helping us all to behave ourselves properly and be ready for the sausage machine of education and the workplace. And I think what I would say is, if I thought that was the case, I wouldn't be doing it. But it's certainly something that needs to be looked at. We're not seeing that very much, but you certainly comes back to needing to understand what mindfulness is and to articulate the links, which Jamie's done extremely well in a very powerful document on the Mindfulness Initiative, of the links between mindfulness capacities and the ability to engage in social change. They have the courage to change, the critical ability to see what's going on. They work together. So, but it's certainly a concern, and we would hate for that to be happening. Okay,
we probably have time for a couple more. We've got a question that seems to be popular about getting this more into the kind of systems, and this sort of cues you up to speak about the long-term vision for education, or sort of questioning the purpose of education as it's currently framed. Pilar, I think we're probably going to struggle to get this person because they're anonymous. Is that right?
Correct, unless they would like to just write in the chat and say now if they would like to come online.
Okay. I tell you what, in the interest of time, I think I might just read it out if that's okay. So yeah, Katherine, in the past, and Adrian, apologies. In the past year, my primary school, lost it, has placed well-being at the heart of our school, and I believe making great strides. I've completed the youth mindfulness course, and I'll be about to do the DOTS course as well. However, my concern is that mindfulness is not being recognised by Ofsted, which for UK and non-UK viewers you might want to explain. It's just disappeared from the chat. Whilst Ofsted is still placing the sole importance on academic education, I feel that schools are going to be reluctant to invest in this area. What are your thoughts?
Shall I answer that, Adrian, first? Is that okay? Yes.
Yeah.
I think at the moment, mindfulness does need to piggyback on other areas of the school. And there is, Ofsted is doing more to recognise what they call personal development. It's gone through all kinds of name changes, but at the moment they call it personal development. And I think showing clearly how mindfulness articulates with that work, with PSHE, personal and social education, for those from the United States who may be watching this, for all of us to really start to think through, what do we think the links are with these other areas? And I think that's something mindfulness needs to think about more, to get out of its bubble and to make the case for how it helps. And we do that in some detail in the document, you know, talking about how mindfulness brings an embodiment and a present moment to work that's sometimes a bit wordy around personal development or social emotional learning. What is it adding, and how can it add value to that work? And I think that's the way forward, really. But, you know, and also, as I was saying earlier, how it links with academic attainment, how there isn't an antithesis between well-being and attainment, how it can link with good teaching and learning. So I think we need to work on all those fronts together.
Yeah, and I'll just add in the document, Ofsted is the Inspectorate of Schools in England, for those of you that aren't aware of that. And what we do in the document, there's a section on kind of education policy in England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and we kind of show where mindfulness can kind of fit into kind of the educational agenda. So in England, relationships education technically became mandatory in September last year. I think schools have been given kind of years grace maybe to start to embed it. But as part of that, there's, you know, schools are expected in England to explicitly teach children, you know, about mental health and well-being, how to cultivate what it is. And so mindfulness can definitely fit within that context. And one thing that I would say about Ofsted and mindfulness, I would be more worried if Ofsted started to talk about mindfulness, because that would increase the chances of then schools just going to tick a mindfulness box because Ofsted want to see it. I think, you know, the reason schools should introduce mindfulness is because they genuinely believe it will help teachers, young people, you know, family members in that community. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Thank you. Can I just add something? I saw a question from John Cabot-Zinn, Jamie, that I think is important just to clarify. He said, should you mention that you know, Oxford is doing the Myriad study? And yes, if we haven't said that, it's just a lack of time. We have actually devoted 2 pages to the Myriad study, you know, watch this space, in our document. And for those who don't know, it is a major trial of mindfulness in schools, plus work on implementation and the teenage brain. It's a fantastic study that should be, we hope, reporting soon, funded by Wellcome Trust. So that, we hope, will start to bring even more credibility to the field. But let's also be aware it may not answer every question we've got. All the findings may not be fantastic. And personally, I get a little worried when people talk about it as the definitive study. I've been around long enough to know that there's never a definitive study. And you can shoot yourself in the foot if you claim there is, because you know that's happened in social emotional learning. Somebody overdid the randomized control trial of a particular program and actually put the field back because they made too much of it. So it's great that Myriad's doing that, and we're all watching that space with great interest. And whatever its findings, it's going to vastly enhance our knowledge.
Yes, exactly. It's definitely important to be aware of it, because it's going to be probably in the newspapers in the UK at least, when it comes out.
Thanks for that reminder, John. That's great.
Yeah. So we've reached our time. It makes me feel like I wish we'd booked a little bit of a longer slot, but we'll have to sort of call time on it now, officially at least, and end it there. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and ushering this what I think is likely to be a seminal publication into the public realm. And yeah, thank you for being a part of that. Yeah, big congratulations to Adrian and Katherine and the rest of the team that have worked so hard on this. Sorry, Katherine, you wanted to jump in now?
Yes, possibly. There were some fantastic questions there that we haven't got time to do. Could we harvest them and maybe put on the Mindfulness Initiative page? I'll be happy to sit down and type out some possible answers Adrian might have as well. So we could at least respond to these lovely people who bothered to ask questions.
Absolutely. Let's do that.
In the next week to do that. I'd be very happy to do that.
Thank you everyone, particularly who asked us questions. And yeah, we look forward. We'd love to have your feedback on email or via the website if you have any thoughts to share or any positivity to share with us, because it is very hard sometimes to be creating these things and offering them into the world and not being totally sure how they're landing. So yeah, any reflections very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.